ovoviviparity, okay, or ovoviviparous. So this is a method of internal fertilization where the eggs develop within the uterus of the mother, but they're attached to a yolk sac that they're feeding off of. So there's little input nutritionally from the mother directly. Okay? They're feeding mostly off of the yolk sac, but they are developing within the mother's body in a uterus. So it's kind of this in-between. When they are born, they are of a stage where they're able to swim and feed on their own. Okay? And usually there's very little parental care after that. So there are a lot of sharks that do this. There are also some bony fishes like rockfish and surf perch that do this as well.
Yeah, just wondering if you go back for one for the other side. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Sure. Okay, so this is what it would look like. They sometimes call these candles the uterus. So what you're really seeing here are the yolk sacs. So this is, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 babies developing in one uterus, and they usually have 2. Okay. And then another batch here. So this is, I'm not sure exactly, that might be some kind of smooth hound or something, I'm not sure, bull shark. Can't see his face. So, but yeah, the two uteri, okay, usually developing several babies within each one that will feed off of that yolk sac and then be born live. Okay? So that's why it's, so ovo, again, egg, and then live birth. Viviparity. Okay? And then, okay, so one that you're probably more familiar with, since it's what happens in mammals, is viviparity, or viviparity. Viviparity, the young are directly attached to the mother's uterus, so they are deriving their nutrition directly from the mother, not a separated yolk sac. Again, there are some sharks and also some surf perches that exhibit this. It's fairly common with sharks, and yeah, surf perches is another one that, especially with local species. So this is a little surf perch being born. Okay? And in fact, I've actually seen them swimming around. Sometimes you'll actually see like a fin sticking out, like it's like almost there. It's like kind of in the process of giving birth. So they'll develop, like one species I work on is black surf perch. They do this, and they might have up to, say, 8 babies developing within them at once. And here's a shark being born here. Yeah?
In the ovoviviparity, the egg comes out, or it breaks and then the baby?
They'll use up that yolk sac. So once the yolk sac is used up, and it's sort of, they're often, they have a very long development. So sometimes it's like 1 to 2 years in sharks that they're within the mother's uterus. So they're feeding off of that yolk sac the whole time. Once they're actually ready to be born, the yolk sac is gone, or nearly gone. They might have like a little nubbin sticking out for a little while until they absorb it. But they're essentially going to absorb all of that, and then they're ready to go, be born and feed on their own. Yeah?
What is uterine milk?
It's just a substance that the mother produces, kind of like, yeah, like that's the substance, that's the nutrients, but it's called uterine milk in fishes. Yeah, it's nothing super fancy, just a chunk. With pelagic spawners, okay, this is what a spawning scenario can look like. Huge cloud, okay, of sperm and eggs, mostly sperm, some eggs. In group spawning fishes like this, when they're spawning into the water column, in these large groups, typically there is sperm competition. So the males will release a lot of sperm at once in hopes of gaining most of the paternity. And in some cases, there might be 1 or 2 females in this group, and then a whole bunch of males all competing to get close to her and get the babies, be the baby daddy. So the advantage of this type of spawning is that you can have wide dispersal. They're spawning up into the water column. Typically, they will do so on a down current area off of a reef, so that those eggs are carried away from the reef into the pelagic zone, where they'll spend, depending on the species, weeks to maybe up to 2 months in the pelagic zone as little planktonic baby fishes, okay? Before then settling down onto some nearby reef. The disadvantage of doing this is not surprising, is that you're going to have a lot that don't make it. Okay, you kind of just, there you go. See ya. So one way that they're taken, of course, is that these are eggs and or little tiny babies. They're delicious. Okay? So there's a lot of plankton feeding fishes and other invertebrates that are going to chow down on these almost immediately. In fact, you'll see sometimes during these spawning events, you'll see little blacksmith or other planktivorous fishes kind of in the area, and you can see them going after the eggs almost immediately. Some of the ways that fishes get around that is by the timing of the time of day that they'll spawn. So there are a lot of dusk spawners where a lot of the planktivorous fishes may not be out, so they try to. There are some timing things where they try to avoid that kind of predation on eggs. And then being in a bit of a current area helps to sort of get them off the reef, where those fish maybe aren't going to go way off the reef to chase them. So that's some ways that they try to compensate. They also compensate by just producing a lot of them. So you hope that maybe a couple % of them will make it. Of maybe 1 million, some of the females can produce hundreds of thousands of eggs, and you just hope that a few will make it. Right? So barred sand bass is an example, a local example that we'll probably talk about again later, that does these large group spawns. Then there are some fishes that will spawn benthically, meaning that they lay their eggs in little nests on the bottom, on the substrate. And that substrate may be different depending on who we're talking about, but often it's either within or around algae, sometimes within a shell of a particular organism, on a rock, under a little ledge. These eggs are a little bit different. They're usually larger and not as buoyant. So when you're a pelagic spawner up into the water column, you want those eggs to float. You want them to go up into the planktonic area. So they usually have some oils in them that help make them buoyant. These ones don't. They tend to be larger and more neutral, okay? And in some cases even negatively buoyant. And they often are laid with a sticky substance kind of surrounding them to help them stay on the substrate. So they do produce a large number, although usually the numbers are not anywhere near what a pelagic spawner would produce. So you tend to get fewer but larger eggs, but still a pretty high number. Another name for these are nesting fishes, so they kind of build little nests usually. There's not a lot of parental care, but that can vary. There are some fishes that do provide some parental care. They'll actually guard the nest. And the larvae, once they're born out of these eggs, depending on the species, some are pelagic, so they'll be born kind of at an earlier stage and go up to the surface and kind of float around for a while before they settle back down somewhere else. Some of them are benthic, so they're born basically where their parents laid them, and they kind of stay around that area, or maybe go to like a nearby. Yeah.
So a pelagic parent is better than two? So
No,
it's not
no,
like-
it's species dependent. It's not individuals.
Oh.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Is it caviar?
Yeah, well, caviar are eggs. Usually that's, well, there's a couple species they use, but sturgeon is an example of one, where they actually strip those eggs from within the body of the sturgeon. So they're not taking them off a reef or something. They're actually getting them
But
from.
are they pelagic eggs or benthic eggs?
I think sturgeon are pelagic spawners. I don't think they're nesters yet. So they actually will strip them from the body. There are some, and I think next time, if we have time, next time I'm going to show you, I don't think we'll have time to do it today, but there's a cool grunion video. These are California grunion. So there are some that are brooders, okay, where they hide eggs in the substrate. In this case, they actually hide them up on the beaches in the sand. So they'll come up, and the male will actually carve out a little area, okay, and lay the eggs in there, or sorry, the female, and then the male will go over and fertilize them. Then it'll take until the next kind of high tide for them to wash back out. So a few weeks later, they'll be washed back out in a slightly more developed form and go out to the plankton. If you've never, you guys are all, well, presumably you all sort of live somewhere around here. I highly recommend, it's better, unfortunately this class is in the wrong time of year, otherwise I would have tried to organize a whole field trip just around it, because it's really fun. But it tends to be late spring, early summer that you get the best grunion runs. But you can go, like some of the beaches where, like Point Dume or any of the Malibu beaches, or down to Rio Aquarium does a lot with organizing groups of people to go out to watch grunion runs. It's really fun. It sounds kind of crazy, and it's kind of a late night activity because they do it later at night, and it's dependent on the moon, so you can kind of plan it around the cycles of the moon. But I highly recommend it. It's really fun to go watch them. So they all come up to shore. There'll just be these like pulses of fish coming up to the sand and doing these crazy like little nests and spawning circles, and then they take off. So it's kind of fun. And I do have, there's a researcher at Pepperdine University who works on these guys and has for many years, and she's made a little, kind of like a 20-minute, 25-minute video all about California grunion. So if I get a chance, if we have some time, I'll show it to you guys. Okay, as I mentioned, there are some fishes that make more of a nest. Okay, so the ones that, the previous one is, you know, they're benthic, but they kind of take off. They don't actually care for them. Then there are the garters, the nest garters. So these are also benthic spawners. They stick their eggs into some nest that they've built, and then they guard them and will protect them. These little buggers are some of the biggest defenders of their territory. Anyone know what fish this is? It's your state worming fish, so you should know it. The Garibaldi. They're super annoying. And they are protected by virtue of being the state marine fish, but sometimes you really want to just because they are highly territorial. And so they build these nests, and their nests usually consist of algae. So they actually kind of like tend, they're almost like little farmers. They'll tend to some algae that they then later will lay the eggs in. And the males typically will defend them very rigorously. These fish, well, they can get up to about maybe yay big, right? Somewhere between here and here. They look pretty inconsequential. I've been bit by them so many times. If you get in their area, they are not shy.